Welcome to the deep dive. We're here to unpack some really fascinating sources, give you those crucial nuggets of knowledge, cut through the noise a bit, and help you connect the dots. Now, let me kick things off with a question for you. How much energy do you reckon your brain is consuming right now? Just, sitting there, even at rest. Turns out it's actually quite a lot. And it's a cost our ancestors paid dearly for. Today, we're embarking on this incredible journey. Our deep dive is going to trace the history of Homo sapiens, from what our sources call an insignificant animal,
Well,
all the way to our current state where we're kind of perched on the edge of becoming something entirely new. We'll explore the huge shifts that shaped who we are, our unique abilities, and maybe most importantly, where we might be headed. Our sources today are some powerful excerpts from Sapiens, a brief history of humankind. It's a really comprehensive look at humanity's past, present, and potential future. It draws from biology, anthropology, history, the works. So our mission in this deep dive, to pull out the most thought-provoking insights about our evolution, what makes us unique, and the often paradoxical consequences of our biggest revolutions. Get ready to maybe rethink some basic assumptions about what it means to be human. Okay, so let's unpack this intelligence thing. We tend to pat ourselves on the back for being smart, right? Assuming more brain power must be better. But our sources point out this fascinating and often overlooked biological cost.
yeah, it's pretty striking. The human brain, it's only about, 2–3% of your body weight, but it eats up a massive 25% of your body's energy when you're just resting.
25%? Wow.
Exactly. Compare that to other apes, their brains only need about 8% of their resting energy. So the real takeaway isn't just that our brains are hungry, it's how archaic humans actually paid for this jumbo drain, as the source calls it.
Paid for it? How?
Well, they spent significantly more time searching for food. And crucially, their muscles atrophied. They got weaker. It's almost like a government shifting funds from defense to education energy, moved from biceps to neurons.
So less brawn, more brain.
Pretty much. It was this profound biological trade-off. Really set us apart.
Okay, so with these big energy-hungry brains, around 70,000 years ago, sapiens start spreading out from East Africa. But Eurasia wasn't empty, right? It was already settled by other kinds of humans.
That's right.
So what happened when we, ran into them? Our sources lay out two really compelling but kind of contradictory theories here.
Indeed. First, you've got the interbreeding theory. This one tells the story of, attraction, sex, and mingling, as the source puts it.
Mingling.
Yeah, it suggests that as sapiens moved across the globe, they basically met and bred with these other human populations. So when sapiens got to the Middle East and Europe, they encountered Neanderthals.
Right, the classic caveman, though maybe that's unfair.
Very unfair, according to the sources. They highlight that Neanderthals were actually formidable, more muscular, brains even larger than sapiens in some cases, and really well adapted to cold climates. They used tools, fire, were skilled hunters. And remarkably, there's archaeological evidence suggesting they cared for their sick and infirm. We found Neanderthal bones from individuals who lived for years with severe disabilities. That points to community care, really challenges that brutish stereotype.
Okay, so if the interbreeding theory is right,
Then today's Eurasians aren't pure sapiens. They're a mix, because sapiens bred with Neanderthals, and maybe in East Asia, with the local Homo erectus populations too.
but then there's the other side of the coin, the replacement theory. That sounds less friendly.
Yeah, it paints a very different picture, one of incompatibility, revulsion, and perhaps even genocide.
Wow.
This theory suggests sapiens and these other humans had different anatomies, maybe different mating habits, even different body odors, leading to, not much mutual interest.
No mingling.
Or if they did interbreed, perhaps the offspring were infertile, like mules, meaning the genetic gap was already too wide to bridge. So in this view, sapiens basically replaced all the earlier human populations without really merging. Their genes just died out.
So one theory says we're all a bit mixed. The other says we're all pure sapiens from that East African migration.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the tricky part is both theories have evidence supporting them. Without more definitive findings, maybe some specific kinds of genetic data, it's really impossible to say for sure which narrative is closer to the truth. They offer very different family trees for us, don't they?
They really do. Given how much we're learning from ancient DNA now, what do you think is the biggest unanswered question about those encounters? Like, what discovery would really settle it?
That's a great question. I mean, current genetics does suggest some interbreeding happened, but the extent, the long-term success of those hybrid groups, that's still debated. For me, the biggest gap is the social dynamic.
How they actually lived together or didn't.
Precisely.
Hmm.
Was the genetic mixing widespread or just isolated events? Was it cooperation or domination? Finding, say, a whole cemetery of clearly hybrid individuals who demonstrably had fertile offspring over generations.
Yeah.
That would really bolster the interbreeding side and make pure replacement harder to argue. That'd
Think-
be a game changer.
Okay, so moving on from our origins. Unlike chimps or those archaic humans whose behavior changed really slowly, driven mostly by genetic tweaks or environmental shifts, sapiens hit this massive turning point, the cognitive revolution. And this is where things get really, really interesting.
Absolutely. After this revolution, sapiens suddenly gained this incredible ability to rapidly change their behavior and, crucially, pass those changes on culturally without needing new genes or a different environment.
How does that work in practice?
Well, a really powerful example the source uses is the idea of childless elites. Think about Catholic priests or Buddhist monks or those Chinese eunuch administrators.
Right, groups that deliberately don't reproduce.
Exactly. They willingly gave up procreation. That flies directly in the face of natural selection, doesn't it? Their choice wasn't driven by a genetic mutation,
Yeah.
but by belief in shared cultural stories, the New Testament, Buddhist teachings, Confucian ideals, whatever it was.
So culture overriding biology.
In a way, yes.
Mm.
Or think about that Berliner the source mentions, born in 1900, lives to be 100. Same DNA her whole life, but she adapts to, what, 5 completely different political systems.
Yeah.
Imperial Germany, Weimar Republic, Nazi Germany, East Germany, reunified Germany. That's profound cultural adaptability.
And this ability to change behavior fast, this cultural leap, that was the secret sauce for sapiens' success.
According to the sources, yes. And the key was the appearance of fiction. The ability to imagine things that aren't actually real.
Fiction, like telling stories, how does that help you build an empire?
Well, it allows huge numbers of strangers to cooperate effectively because they believe in the same common myths or imagined orders. Neanderthals could share info about a lion nearby, sure, but they probably couldn't invent and collectively believe in, say, a tribal spirit or a nation or human rights.
Things that don't physically exist, but we all agree exist.
Precisely. And that ability to create and share these fictions allowed sapiens to cooperate in much larger groups than any other animal, far beyond the limits of personal acquaintance.
So if we connect that to today,
These imagined orders are basically the foundation of almost everything complex in our world. Churches, rooted in religious myths, states, national myths, justice systems, legal myths about laws and rights, even corporations.
like Peugeot, the example in the source.
Exactly. Peugeot isn't just its factories or cars. It's a legal fiction, an entity that exists purely in our shared imagination, thanks to laws and economic beliefs. Our entire social reality is woven from these shared stories.
That sounds a bit like we're all trapped in the Matrix. Does the source suggest we can ever actually break free? Or are we just doomed to swap one fiction for another?
Well, the source puts it quite starkly. It says, when we break down our prison walls and run towards freedom, we are in fact running into the more spacious exercise yard of a bigger prison.
So no escape, just bigger prisons.
That seems to be the implication for large-scale societies. The idea is these are intersubjective phenomena. They exist only because millions or billions collectively believe. You deciding the dollar is worthless doesn't change anything. Changing everyone's mind requires huge effort, new organizations, and crucially, a compelling alternative myth. So maybe absolute freedom from all imagined orders isn't really possible if you want complex societies.
Okay, so if societies are built on these complex myths, managing them must have become a challenge as they got bigger.
A huge challenge.
Mhm.
And that's where writing comes in. But maybe not quite like you think.
Not for poetry and epics.
Not at first, no. The sources point out the first recorded name in history we know of wasn't a king or a prophet. It was Cushim, an accountant.
An accountant, seriously?
Yep. Early Sumerian writing, the first we know of, was developed for humdrum economic documents, recording how much barley was paid in taxes, who owed what debt. It was what they call a partial script, more like mathematical notation than full language. Great for data, not so good for sonnets.
So bureaucracy basically invented writing.
In a way, yes. And the key insight here isn't just inventing the symbols. It was the ability to organize and retrieve all that data. Imagine tons of clay tablets. How do you find the one you need from 30 years ago?
Nightmare. Like searching emails without a search function.
Exactly. So cultures like Sumer, Egypt, China, the Inca, they thrived because they didn't just write, they invested in systems. Cataloging, archives, training scribes, clerks, librarians. The Inca, for example, didn't have script as we know it, but they used clippus.
Those knotted cords.
Right. Intricate knots on colored cords. They used them to record vast amounts of numerical data, taxes, census info, property records, absolutely essential for managing their huge empire. It wasn't just the writing, it was a whole data management system.
Okay, so the cognitive revolution gave us fiction and organization. Then comes another massive shift, the agricultural revolution. This totally changed our relationship with food, with animals, with the planet, really. Our sources call it a Faustian bargain. Sounds ominous. What was the trade-off?
Well, it started perhaps around 18,000 years ago. The climate warmed up, especially in the Middle East, making it perfect for wild wheat and barley to just flourish.
And humans noticed.
They did. They started gathering it more intensively.
Yeah.
And inadvertently, they helped it spread, carrying grains back to camps, spilling some, creating patches near settlements. They also started using fire to clear forests, which let the wheat take over, get more sunlight, water.
So we helped wheat conquer the landscape.
Pretty much. And this led to groups like the Natufian culture in the Levant settling down. Instead of wandering, they built permanent villages, started intensively harvesting and processing these wild cereals. They built stone houses, granaries, invented new tools like sickles and mortars and pestles. They were basically becoming farmers, even before full-scale cultivation.
And there's that really wild idea from the sources about Göbekli Tepe.
Ah, yes, that massive temple complex in Turkey, built by hunter-gatherers before agriculture really took off.
Right. The source suggests maybe, just maybe, people started intensely cultivating wheat, not just for more food day to day, but to support the massive effort needed to build these huge ceremonial structures.
It flips the usual script, doesn't it? Normally, we think villages come first, then maybe temple. This suggests the drive to build something monumental might have actually spurred on agriculture.
It really makes you ask that question the source poses. Did we domesticate wheat, or did wheat domesticate us?
That's the core of the Faustian bargain idea. Who really benefited? Sure, agriculture eventually supported way more people, but the source points out that early farmers' diets, based heavily on cereals, were often worse than foragers. Less nutritious, harder to digest, terrible for teeth.
And vulnerable, right, if the wheat crop failed.
Exactly. Total dependence on one or two staples meant catastrophe starvation if there was a drought, or pests, or floods. Foragers had a more varied diet, more fallback options. So the initial switch might have meant more people, yes, but perhaps individuals who were less healthy worked harder and were more stressed and insecure.
So the progress wasn't necessarily better for the average person living through it.
That's the provocative reframing. We tend to see agriculture as this obvious leap forward, but for the individual sapiens at the time, it might have actually been a decline in quality of life compared to foraging.
And this bargain wasn't just with plants, was it? We struck a similar deal with animals.
A very similar and perhaps even darker deal. Sheep, goats, pigs, chickens.
From an evolutionary angle, the source says it was a massive success for them. Billions of them now exist. Chickens are the most common bird on Earth. Cattle, pigs, sheep. The most common large mammals after us.
Right. Success measured purely by the number of DNA copies spreading across the planet. But the source forces us to confront the other side. The individual experience of those animals.
How did we even domesticate them?
It was a gradual process. First, selective hunting, maybe targeting aggressive males, leaving females and young. Then protecting the herd from other predators. Then corralling them. And finally, selective breeding, actively choosing the most submissive, plumpest, or woolliest animals to reproduce and slaughtering the rest.
Reading out the wildness.
Essentially, yes. And the result, according to the source, is that domesticated chickens, cattle, pigs, sheep are among the most miserable creatures that ever lived.
That's a strong statement.
It is. But it highlights this stark contrast between evolutionary success, getting your DNA copied millions of times, and individual suffering. The dairy industry is given as a chilling example. Cows kept almost constantly pregnant, their calves taken away almost immediately.
So the milk isn't wasted on the calf.
Right. Or historical practices mentioned, like tying thorn rings around calves' mouths so they couldn't suckle properly, or even puncturing young camels' noses for the same reason. It forces you to consider the profound ethical dimension of our relationship with the animals that underpin our civilization.
Okay, so societies are getting bigger, more complex, thanks to agriculture and maybe these shared fictions. But how do you manage trade and cooperation between thousands, millions of strangers who don't know each other? The old economy of favors and barter just wouldn't scale up.
It breaks down completely.
Yeah.
You need something else. And the answer, our sources say, was money, which is described as a purely mental revolution.
Mental. How so?
because money isn't really about the physical coin or shell itself. At its core, it's a system of mutual trust. It's the shared belief that this token, this thing, represents value and can be exchanged for goods or services pretty much anywhere, with anyone.
So it started with things that had actual value.
Some early forms did, like Sumerian barley money around 3000 BC, fixed amounts of grain. That has intrinsic value, you can eat it. Later you get things like silver shekels, which had maybe less intrinsic use but high cultural value.
And then coins.
Right, around 640 BC in Lydia, modern Turkey. They started making standardized weights of metal, importantly, stamped with a mark from a king or government. That mark was basically a guarantee of the value. And trying to fake it wasn't just fraud. It was an attack on the king's authority, his sovereignty.
So money becomes this universal language of trust between strangers.
Exactly. But the trust isn't really invested in other people or gods or sacred traditions. It's invested in the money itself and the system behind it.
And the source suggests this has a downside, that it can erode older values.
It does suggest that money can corrode local traditions, family ties, intimate relationships, replacing them with the cold laws of supply and demand. It gives dark examples, like parents selling children into debt slavery or mercenaries selling loyalty to the highest bidder.
Grim.
But it also notes it's a delicate dance. People don't just let markets destroy everything. They constantly build new dams, new ethical or social structures to protect certain values, family, religion, national honor, from being purely commodified.
Okay, so money helped unify economies. What about unifying ideas or progress? Another huge shift was the scientific revolution, right? The very idea that we could actually improve the world.
That was revolutionary in itself. Before about 1500, most cultures looked backwards. The Golden Age was in the past. Things were seen as static or maybe even getting worse. The scientific revolution brought this radical new idea. Maybe we don't know everything, and maybe admitting our ignorance is the first step towards actually discovering new knowledge and making real progress.
And this started in Western Europe.
Primarily, yes, around 1500. Why exactly there and then is still debated, but that's where it took off. But a really key point the source makes is that science itself can't set its own priorities.
What do you mean?
Well, science can tell us how genes work, but it can't tell us whether we should use that knowledge to cure cancer or to try and engineer super intelligent humans or, create cows with ridiculously huge udders for more milk. Those decisions aren't scientific.
They're ethical, political.
Exactly. They're political, economic, ideological decisions. Science needs funding, direction. It only really flourishes when it's allied with some kind of ideology or institution, a government, a business, a religion even, that provides the money and tells it what problems are worth solving.
So what ideologies ended up funding science?
The source argues that scientific research really took off and shaped the modern world because it allied itself with two particularly powerful forces over the last 500 years.
Which were?
Imperialism and capitalism. This feedback loop discovery enables conquest and profit, which funds more discovery, has been arguably history's main engine ever since.
Let's talk about capitalism. Before that, the source says credit was hard to get.
Very rare, especially large-scale, long-term credit, because the prevailing belief was that the total amount of wealth in the world was pretty much fixed, like a pie that never grows.
A zero-sum game.
Right. If I got rich, it must be because I took your slice. So lending large sums for risky future ventures seemed crazy. Why would the pie be bigger later?
But capitalism changed that thinking.
Fundamentally, it introduced this new core ethic, almost a new religion, the source calls it. The idea that profits must be reinvested to increase future production. Wealth sitting idle isn't enough. It has to become capital money invested to make more money. It's built on the belief that the pie can and should always get bigger. Perpetual economic growth.
And that linked up perfectly with science.
Absolutely. Capitalists, whether governments or private businesses, started funding scientific research that promised new technologies, increased efficiency, new markets, basically ways to make the pie grow faster and generate more profit for reinvestment.
And that drove the Industrial Revolution.
It was the engine. We didn't suddenly find limitless resources. We found, through science funded by capital, new ways to convert energy, like steam power, and exploit materials, like coal, then oil, plastics, aluminum. We kept finding ways to bake a bigger pie.
And the source highlights this weird capitalist consumerist ethic that came out of it.
Yeah, it's quite provocative. It says the supreme commandment for the rich becomes invest. And for everybody else, it's buy.
Indulge yourself.
Pretty much. Unlike older ethical systems that often preached austerity or self-denial, this new ethic basically promises paradise, or at least Happiness through consumption. Buy more stuff, stimulate the economy, keep the growth going. And, the source cheekily adds, it's maybe the first religion in history whose followers actually do what they're asked. We see it on TV, we absorb it, we buy.
So the Industrial Revolution wasn't just about factories and steam engines. It totally remade society itself.
Profoundly. It didn't just change production. It changed daily life, social structures, even our sense of time. The timetable and the assembly line became the model for almost everything: schools, hospitals, government.
How did it change family and community?
Well, before industry took over, life for most people revolved around the family, nuclear, and extended, and the local village or community. They were your welfare system, your healthcare, your education network, your social safety net. The kingdom or the market might exist, but they felt quite distant for many.
And industry changed that.
Dramatically. Over the last 2 centuries, the market and the state grew incredibly powerful. They basically took over many functions of the family and community. The state started offering education, healthcare, pensions, unemployment insurance, police protection. It promised to be the mother and father of the individual.
Which sounds like liberation in some ways.
It definitely was, in many respects. Individuals, especially women and children, gained more autonomy, economic rights, freedom to choose partners or careers rather than being bound by tradition or family dictates.
But there was a cost.
The cost, the source argues, was the weakening of those strong, intimate community bonds. We became more individualistic, but also potentially more alienated, more disconnected, more dependent on these large impersonal systems, the state and the market. That image of Charlie Chaplin getting swallowed by the machine in modern times, it captures that feeling perfectly, the individual caught in the relentless rhythm of industrial society.
You mentioned the state taking over protection. The source also talks about a decline in violence, right? That seems counterintuitive given the 20th century.
It does seem counterintuitive, but the long-term data is pretty compelling. While the 20th century had horrific wars and genocides, the average person's risk of dying violently at the hands of another person has decreased dramatically compared to pre-state societies or even medieval times.
How so?
Largely because strong states monopolized the use of violence. They suppressed local feuds, banditry, private wars. Think medieval Europe, where murder rates might have been 20 to 40 times higher per capita than in modern Europe. Also, the nature of wealth changed. You can't easily loot knowledge or complex factories like you could loot land or gold. And the cost of large-scale war became potentially existential with nuclear weapons.
But doesn't that kind of gloss over state violence or the psychological costs you just mentioned, alienation, control? Are those maybe hidden forms of violence?
That's a really important nuance. The source focuses on the decline of interpersonal violence murder rates, death in warfare as a percentage of population. And by that measure, there's a clear trend. But you're right, it doesn't fully capture state-sponsored violence or systemic oppression or the psychological toll of modern life, the decline of community, the pressures of the market, state surveillance. These aren't violence in the same way as a sword fight, but they exert immense pressure and control. So while you're statistically much safer from being murdered today, even in many dictatorships, the source acknowledges this progress came with trade-offs, including that sense of alienation and maybe a more subtle kind of societal control. It's definitely not as simple, everything got better story.
Okay, so we started this whole deep dive talking about our brains, this amazing product of millions of years of natural selection. But now, here we are, 21st century, and our sources tell us something really startling. Homo sapiens isn't just subject to natural selection anymore. We're starting to break its laws, replacing it with intelligent design.
It's a huge claim, but the logic is compelling. For nearly 4 billion years, life on Earth evolved through natural selection. Random mutations, environmental pressures. That's how you get giraffes with long necks. Nobody designed it. Intelligent design just wasn't really a thing.
But we started tinkering with it.
The first crack in that old system, the source argues, came maybe 10,000 years ago with the agricultural revolution, when humans started selectively breeding plants and animals, making wheat yield more grain, making chickens fatter and slower. That wasn't natural selection. It was humans detouring it for our own purposes.
But today it's different, more direct.
Much more direct, and way more profound. We're not just selecting traits that already exist. Scientists are now actually engineering living beings, introducing completely new characteristics, genes from totally different species, things that natural selection would likely never produce.
Like Alba, the glowing rabbit.
Exactly. Alba, the fluorescent green rabbit, created back in 2000. Scientists took a gene from a jellyfish, one that makes it glow green, and put it into a rabbit embryo. Alba wasn't a product of natural selection or even selective breeding in the old sense. She was a product of direct, human intelligent design, a harbinger of things to come, as the source puts it.
So the people who argue for intelligent design, they might be wrong about the past, but right about the future.
It's an ironic twist, isn't it? Biologists are absolutely right. Natural selection drove evolution for billions of years. But looking forward, we are becoming the intelligent designers. The source suggests we're doing this in three main ways, ways that could fundamentally change what life even means.
Okay, what's the first way?
The first is biological engineering, direct intervention at the biological level. We've done simple versions for ages, castrating bulls to make oxen, or historically creating eunuchs. But now, we can change biological sex with surgery and hormones. Genetic engineering is becoming more sophisticated.
And that weird ear on the mouse.
Right, that photo from 1996 where scientists grew a structure shaped like a human ear on the back of a mouse using cartilage cells from a cow. It's this eerie, almost mythological-seeming blending of species made real by technology. And then there's de-extinction.
Bringing back mammoths.
Potentially mapping the mammoth genome from frozen samples, maybe using an elephant egg. The technology is advancing. The source even floats the idea of bringing back Neanderthals if we could sequence their full genome and find a surrogate. Biological engineering could reshape the living world in ways we can barely imagine.
Okay, what's the second path?
Cyborg engineering. This is about merging the organic and the non-organic, creating beings that are part living tissue, part machine.
Like in science fiction.
It's starting to happen. The source mentions examples like research into cyborg insects, real insects fitted with tiny electronic components, maybe for surveillance or search and rescue, or experiments with rats that have electrodes implanted in their brains, allowing their movements or feelings to be influenced, even controlled by computers. It blurs that line between organism and machine.
That's unsettling. And the third way?
The third, and maybe the most radical, is the engineering of inorganic life, creating beings that aren't based on organic chemistry at all.
Like robots, the AI.
Going even beyond that, think about computer programs, digital viruses, that can already replicate themselves, mutate, evolve independently of their creators, adapting to the digital environment, but then push it further. What about uploading a human mind?
Backing up your brain to a hard drive.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If you could perfectly map and simulate your brain's connections and activity on a computer, would that digital entity be you? Could it have consciousness? Or what if programmers could create an entirely new digital mind from scratch, one with self-awareness?
Wow. That opens up huge questions.
Immense questions. The source mentions a major European Union project aiming to create a functional simulation of a human brain inside a supercomputer within decades. If something like that succeeds, or if we create true inorganic evolving intelligence, life could potentially break free from the limitations of organic chemistry altogether. It could spread into the vastness of the inorganic realm, taking forms we literally cannot conceive of now. That wouldn't just be another historical revolution. It could be the biggest biological revolution since the origin of life itself. #tag outro.
So we've taken quite a journey, from Homo sapiens defined by this costly brain and our unique knack for fiction, all the way to standing on the verge of directing our own evolution, maybe even creating new kinds of life, achieving something like, well, godhood. But what does it all mean for us, for our experience? The sources leave us with this really profound paradox of power. Sapiens have become masters of the planet, right? We can reshape environments, create incredible technologies, wield immense power. But has all this power actually made us happier? Has it reduced overall suffering in the world? It's a tough question. And the sources suggest the answer is probably not, or at least is very unclear. Despite all our advancements, these huge increases in collective human power haven't reliably translated into greater well-being for the average individual sapiens. And often, our success has come at a terrible cost to other animals.
So we're incredibly powerful.
More powerful than ever before, the source says, but have very little idea what to do with all that power. We seem to be driven by acquiring more power and growth, without a clear sense of purpose or a good track record of using that power wisely or ethically. And that leads to the final, really provocative thought the source leaves us with. It asks, quite simply, is there anything more dangerous than dissatisfied and irresponsible gods who don't know what they want? As we gain more and more power to design our future, to design life itself, maybe even design our own desires, what kind of gods are we actually becoming? And who or what are we designing this future for? Something to think about.